Now, we're not going to go through this whole chapter in one setting, because that would be an awful lot. We'd have to skip a lot of pages, and by the end of it, we'd be like, man. So we're going to take a look at we'll probably break this up into 3, to be honest with you. Just kind of have to see how quick it goes. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is, the first thing they bring to us in the chapter is the one world government. Now, how many of you have ever heard of a one world government? That was kind of made popular back in the 90s. It was a great and wonderful goal that the whole world would come together and we'd all dance around flowers and sing praises to each other or whatever. I don't know, some big utopian dream. And well, as you know, it hasn't happened. However, it will happen. And the question, that's what we're going to be looking at today, is the when and the how part of it. Daniel, I believe it's in Daniel 2. How many of you guys are familiar with the book of Daniel? He was taken captive by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. All right? Not a big deal. But this one was a big deal. And the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he's a little on what we might call the maniacal side, and a whole lot on the cruel side. So what he does is, under the pain of death, all of his magicians and soothsayers and astrologists and blah, 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 he brings them all together, right? All these gurus of knowledge. And he says, here's the deal, fellas. You're going to tell me my dream. You're going to tell me what it means. And if you don't, off with your heads. And you're like, no one can do that. You have to tell us the dream before we can interpret it. And he's like, no, not telling you the dream. He was what we might call a nut job. Well, what he didn't know was there happened to be this Hebrew boy there named Daniel. And Daniel was a prophet of God. And Daniel finds out about this, and he goes to the king, and he says, look, king, dreams come from God. And God is also responsible for the interpretation of it. And then he tells him the dream. He said, you saw a statue. It was a giant statue. It had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver. I guess you'd say that like a trunk, the core here, stomach and legs of bronze, and then iron legs, and then at the end of it, its toes were iron and clay mixed. And here's what it means. It means that there will be 4 world governments, and the 5th will be destroyed. Because there's a rock that was cut without hands, slung at the statue, and it crushed the statue completely up into dust, and the dust blew away. And then that rock that was cut without hands takes over the entire world. So there's going to be 4 world governments. First one of gold was the Babylonian Empire. And you can see an outline of this on page 187. You can see the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw, and it has listed there the Babylonian Empire from 606 BC. That was the time of the captivity. The Babylonian Empire was overtaken by the Medes and Persians, which was the silver. And isn't that interesting that that was the silver? It was less strong. It wasn't as worldwide. It wasn't as totalitarian as the first one, Nebuchadnezzar's, because Nebuchadnezzar had control of everything in the world, the entire world at that time. And it was the gold one. And the Medes and Persians are actually 2 different groups of people. And if you notice, that covers the trunk, the main part of the top part of the torso here, and it had 2 arms. You had the Medes and the Persians. I always thought that was kind of interesting. And then, after the Medes and Persians, then you had the Greek Empire. And the Greek Empire was led by Alexander the Great, and it was actually a really short empire. Alexander the Great didn't live very long. He got sick while he was, I guess you'd say, clear east or out east. Caught a virus and died. Imagine that. One of the greatest generals in the history of the world dies because of a stupid little virus. And then after the Greeks came the Romans, and the Roman Empire never really was overtaken by anybody. There's been several that have tried since the Roman Empire to make a one world government, to make a one world empire, but it hasn't happened. There have been all sorts of people who have tried, like Genghis Khan. He took over quite a bit of the world, but not all of it. Napoleon tried. Kaiser Wilhelm tried. Hitler tried. Stalin tried. And all these other governments have tried, but they've all failed. The reason they failed is because God said there would be four. The fifth would be the Antichrist, the one with the 10 toes, the one with the iron and clay mixed together. And then the last empire, the last one, would be crushed by a rock not cut by hands. Who do we know that is a reference to? That is a reference to Jesus from the New Testament. He is the cornerstone, the chief rock, the one that crushes all the world governments. Matter of fact, we still live under a Roman style of government. Now, a lot of people don't think that we do, that Rome died out, it collapsed internally, they ended up becoming so decadent that they squandered all their resources, became weaker and weaker and weaker until they collapsed. And then once they collapsed, the world went into the Dark Ages until this time. And the world had to kind of pick itself up and restart, if you will. They have a term for it, it's called, and I can't say, I know the word, but it's going to be hard for me to say because I've been battling a sinus cold. Caesarean imperialism. It's a combination of Caesar. See, because we have a similar government to what they had. There were politicians, there were senates, there were representatives, there were lawyers, there were, all these things that were similar to them. Our government still has, and many of the world governments still do today. Now, the last kingdom, the 10-toed kingdom, the very end of time, is an interesting one. That's the one that will show up last, right before Christ comes back and takes over. And it talks about how that is a weak form of government, that it's a weaker government because you have iron and clay. Okay, a clay form of government would be similar to what we have. An iron form of government would be similar to the dictatorship that we see in communist China. And the reason ours should be considered our republic, because we really don't live in a democracy, as so many people think, it's actually a republic, is weaker because the country can swing back and forth from conservative to liberal to something in the middle, depending on the whims of the voters. Where a communist China's dictatorship is not weak because one person can make a decision and something get done. In our form of government, if a politician wants to keep his job, he has to garner support from the public. The only way to garner support from the public a lot of time is to bribe the public with public funds. You're thinking, huh? Yes. I will give you tax breaks if you vote for me. Ever heard that story? Well, that money comes from the public coffers. And I forget which Greek philosopher it was, says this: the government will soon fail as soon as the public realizes they can vote themselves money from the public coffer. Well, when that happens, the government becomes weaker. So that's how you have that clay and iron mix. And as we go into this, you'll see that these last 10 kingdoms don't stick together. God flat out will tell us as we go along here in Daniel and in Revelation that when John saw 10 horns coming up out of the beast, 3 of the horns were plucked out, 3 of the horns were done away with, 3 of the horns were taken captive by one little bitty horn. And that little horn had eyes and a mouth that was very pompous and arrogant. I believe the word they actually use is pompous in here, but that we can also use as arrogant, blasphemous. This little horn that comes up and takes over 3 kingdoms. And then ends up the other 7 throw their support behind the one, and that one, of course, is the Antichrist. So we see that these iron and clay toes don't mingle and don't stay together really well, because God tells us that 3 of them rebel and get crushed. It's Daniel 7, chapter 7. It says, I was considering the horns, this is Daniel speaking, considering the horn, there was another one, a little one, coming up among them, who before him the 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn in this horn had eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. In Daniel 7, 19 and 20, and Daniel 7, 24, they tell us the same sort of thing, that 3 of those 10 kingdoms fall, and the Antichrist takes them over. Daniel's 10 kings rise first, and then the Antichrist rises up quickly in that last world system. He comes to power rapidly, and the 3 kings, or the three countries, if you will, or 3 areas of the world, because we're talking about not 8 continents, but 10 global countries or areas resisting. And when they resist him, he overcomes them quickly, violently, and completely. Now, in the books that they wrote, the fiction books that they wrote, they put together England, Egypt, and the Americas rise up against him, and he quickly crushes them all. So what we're seeing is the last time, the next time that there is one world government, it will be divided into 10 sectors, 10 kingdoms. There will be 10 kings, politicians, rulers over each of those. And at some point, the Antichrist is going to rise up in that world system. 3 kings, 3 countries, 3 sections of the world will fight against him, and he will quickly put an end to him. Now, we probably think this is new information. However, one world government is not new information. It has been going on since World War I. And for those that know history, we all know and have read about the League of Nations, which was the first attempt at a one world organization, a one world government. And that happened right after World War I. Trusted advisor to Woodrow Wilson, and I didn't know that part, but he was an obsessed socialist. I didn't know that he was a socialist. I mean, what you read in history books is written by those that are left. So, it doesn't normally tell you that the guy was crazy about that whole socialism thing. But he went to the Geneva Peace Conference. They worked things out. They brought it back to the United States, said, hey, we're going to do this League of Nations things. The United States Senate said, no, we're not. We're not going to do the whole one world League of Nations thing. So it got voted out. But they didn't give up. One world government organizers have never given up. They don't quit. They have, as you get into the chapter, find out they have a lot of money and a lot of people backing them. So what did happen was, as kind of a replacement, the United States formed the Council for Foreign Relations. And that is an organization you do not hear much of, because they don't want you to hear much of. Eventually, after World War II, the United Nations was formed in 1945. And under the guise of bringing the world together, making the level playing field for trade and commerce so that no country would have to go to war with another country over resources ever again. Has that happened? No, not at all. Since World War I, since World War II, there has been more bloodshed in war than all the history combined and all the time prior to. That's also led to another organization called the Club of Rome, and they are convinced the world is in trouble because of overpopulation. Now, we have heard that before. And how they go about controlling overpopulation is they advocate birth control, they advocate abortion, they advocate contraceptives, they advocate government-directed progress. You guys heard of the progressives that are infiltrating the political system now? That's nothing more than a different word for socialism. That's all that is. They are under the impression that the world environment, and we've all heard of this before, and the world would be so much better off if there were so many more dead people, because people are what's wrong with the world. So we'll just do away with a bunch. and the world will be better, right? I mean, just get rid of them. You know, those undesirable types, those that are, you know, not like me, so we'll just get rid of them. And that's basically what they're trying to accomplish. As time has went on, and we found out more about it, I guess you say, that it became more popular and more out there, that was a goal, was during the 90s when George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, got us into the Gulf War. And it was, as they used as an Exhibit A. You know, if a dictator rises up and does something like what Saddam Hussein was doing, then the world, if you remember, everybody joined us and went in there and stomped him in what? 3 days, 4 days, that we ran right through Kuwait and all the way to Baghdad. That this is what could happen, you know, and this is great. And this is an awesome display of the world coming together to stop a maniacal dictator. And that was good that you know, that he was taken out of power. But on the backside of it was used to convince more and more people that together as one world, it would be so much better if we would keep joining together like this. So from that point forward, I guess you would say, since it works so well, they form another club, Club of Rome, and they have been laying foundations to change the UN Security Council from 8 to 10, to put 10 people, 10 men, women, whomever, in charge of the Security Council, and each of those 10 people would be in charge of 10 regions of the world. I mean, that sounds really awesome, because then you have 10 people who can take care of each region, and then there wouldn't be war, because the wealthier countries would subsidize the poorer countries. Oh, ain't that something that's going on right now? Do not the richer countries subsidize all these poorer countries? And what happens to the poorer countries? Do they get better? I don't know that any of them ever really have. But that makes a playing field level. You know, by taking from the rich and giving to the poor, that makes it all even, and everything's great. You know, you guys ain't buying it either, neither do I. But these things that are happening, as the world moves towards this one world government, God clearly told us in Revelation 13, Daniel, and Thessalonians, that these sort of things would happen, that the world would move and shift itself toward one world organization, one governmental power. As we go along here, we will see a name that I'm sure you guys have heard, and this book was written a few years back, and he has done more since this writing. November 5th, 2009, a project was announced by billionaire George Soros that the United States dollar, the US dollar, which is what most of the world economy is based on, was no longer a viable and sustainable form of finance. So it needed to be taken apart. It needed to be redone. It needs to be revamped to a modern form of system. And has worked with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to put together a plan for when the dollar and the United States economy crashes to supplant a one world currency. This is going to seem like an interesting question. How many of you actually have cash, folded money in your pocket? How many of you have a piece of plastic that gives you access to the rest of your money? How many places actually take cash anymore? It's getting to be less and less, isn't it? There's more and more of a, use your debit card, use your credit card, that way you can keep track of it. It's more secure than cash because nobody can just come along and whack you in the back of the head and take your cash. They can get your debit card, but they can't do anything with it. That's the story. So as we move more and more toward a cashless society, that makes it easier and easier to do away with the US dollar and put in a one world currency. How many years ago was it that the United States economy crashed big? Was that 2010? 8, 9, 10? Yeah, right along in there. What year was that George Soros said that the United States government form of finance wasn't any good? 2009. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? And when you look on page 195, you'll see that it's not as interesting as what we think, because it happened in Denmark, England, and Russia, all in different years. Because this guy trades in world economies at a level that I can't even imagine. And when he decides a currency is going to fluctuate, he either pulls out or puts in, and it causes serious damage to that economy. I mean, think about it. This is one man with the kind of capital it takes to either crush a country's economy or lift it up. And during that same time frame, he determined that the United States economy, the US dollar, wasn't viable. Interesting. Now, of course, he sees himself as a philanthropist, that he's a steward of goodwill among men, and he's organized some very heavy-duty, pro-liberal, anti-conservative, hard-left groups, like MoveOn.org. You guys ever heard of them? The American Centers for Progress. Yeah, I've heard of that one quite a bit. Same way with MoveOn. The other one I hadn't heard of that they list. And we know from recent history there's been a lot of, that's what I'm looking for, rebellious activity in the streets, and he's been the one financing it to disrupt elections. He also finances all sorts of other things, like legalization of drugs, unrestrained and unrestricted immigration, gay marriage, sex education for children, pro-abortion, and pro-assisted suicide groups. He's even put together $50 million to put together a group for economic thinking with the sole purpose of making a one world currency. And he's not the only one that's up to it. He's just the one that's the most obvious, the one that we see in the news the most often. Groups such as this have been working for quite a few years. They're no doubt under the control of Satan, because Satan wants to take the world right back to Babylon again. That was the last time the world was united under one cause, was to build a tower in Babel. And where did we say that the world economy and world government's going to end up in the last chapter? Back to Babylon. And that's what Satan's goal is. And that's what these powers that have all this money, and these power mongers, if you will, and these one world elitists are doing, is trying to take the world right back to Babylon. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And they're going to use a system of government agencies, including world religion, control the economy, and control the media, and bring all these things together to give the world population no choice, if you will. And for decades, people have been talking about a world tax, a world court, a world police force. We even have many of these things put together. I mean, the Nuremberg trials, that was a world court. The UN has its own court system. The UN has its own police force. You know, each of the countries pay a tax to the UN to support the UN. This stuff is already in place and it's already happening. We just don't see it because it doesn't make the media. And if you're controlling the media, then you can make sure that the story goes your way, and that only what you want to hear comes out. And if something else comes out, that person's obviously a traitor to the country and needs to be executed, needs to be run off to Russia, needs to be, I don't know, say jump off a bridge, crash a car, take a .22 bullet to the back of the head. I mean, things like that happen all the time. And we've seen throughout history in just this country, in the past 15 to 20 years, things like that have happened an awful lot. And we think, well, that's terrible, to commit murder, to kill people, to make your agenda. But we're talking about at a level where a human life means nothing. And it really doesn't to a lot of these folks. It's just a number on a ledger. It won't, and it does not, and will not take much for the world to unite under a cause, under a banner, under something. The easiest way to get people to unite is to give them a common enemy. Learned this years ago. Why drill sergeants are so mean? One, to toughen the men up, and the ladies now. Second, it gives everybody in the platoon a common enemy, so they band together, and that's the ultimate goal. Why a lot of times our industrial supervisors hard on a crew? To get them to band together. Same way with coaches. Why are they hard on the kids? To get them to band together and to work together for a common goal. It's typical, used all the time method, and I think these folks will find a common enemy. After the rapture of the church, the common enemy will be Judeo-Christian principles. And we already see that under attack hard. But after the rapture, it'll be even worse. I am sure that the narrative and the news story will be that once we are rid of the last vestiges of Judaism and Christianity, the world will be able to unite and we'll be able to go into this euphoric utopia, and the whole world will be so much better if we could just get rid of those pesky Christians. So what we need to do is you guys need to root out everybody in your family that you think might be a Christian. And we'll bring them to the authorities and we'll take care of them. And I do believe that's the story that they will go with. They gave a prediction in here that they didn't predict, but according to a lot of these one world organizations, they're expecting and optimistically proposing that this will all be in place by 2050. And it could happen quicker. If some major catastrophe or some major event was to happen, the world could unite pretty quick under a lot of this stuff, and things could happen pretty quick. We'll see how it goes. Good news is we're not here for it. So what we can do is we can see, watch, and hear what's going on and understand that our Lord's getting closer and closer. Next week, starting on page 197, we'll go through one world religion and how the world's religions unite. Now, that doesn't run very many pages, so we'll see how long it'll take us. Go from there. Any questions on one world government or one world economy?
I noticed on page 189, it talked about the beast, and I thought it was insightful. A lot of people see the government as beautiful and impressive, and we hear this, in our political ads and such. And when there's an election, it's like, what is whoever's running going to do for us? How are they going to solve our problems instead of looking to God? We look to government to provide jobs and to provide welfare and to provide, right down the list.
And now we can add to that, provide medical assistance.
Right.
Or medical care.
And I'm not saying that all of those things are bad, but I'm saying that God didn't intend for the government to provide all those things. We should be stepping up as Christians also, and primarily. Anyway, the fact that it highlights that, again, this is happening already, that we look to the government as citizens to provide and take care of all our needs instead of God, is what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way.
And it hasn't been that many years ago, probably 100, 150 or so, that the church provided all the welfare support, the church provided all the education, and the stability of the community. But you've noticed slowly, over time, that provision has shifted. People stopped the provision from the church, and it shifted to the government. The government slowly took over the education. Most of our famous Ivy League colleges were Christian colleges when they opened up and began with the sole purpose of teaching preachers. There were seminaries. Not so much anymore. Any other questions? All right then. Next week we'll take a look at the one world religion. That might be actually closer than what y'all think even.